Well, this trip has not gone at all as expected, but in the best possible way.
I'm headed south down Interstate 5, though eventually I'll start cutting west towards the Oregon Coast Range. This is the one and only day within a span of weeks with no rain in the forecast, and that's looking pretty accurate, though I'm hitting the occasional brief shower here and there. I'm headed into an area of public land I've never explored before, but first I'm making a slight detour because on the map I noticed a lake tucked up in here, so I just want to take a quick look as long as I'm nearby. This lake was formed naturally about 1400 years ago when a landslide dammed a river whose waters now churn wildly out of a choke point at the downstream end of the lake. This little detour has led me to discover what looks like an alternate route up into the mountains, so I'm going to see if this will actually work.
So last week in Eugene, we got hit with actually a couple of ice storms. We had so many trees come down all over the city, just storm damage everywhere. I had a little bit of damage in my yard, not too bad. Many people, especially as you moved east into Springfield, some friends of mine, just utter destruction of their trees. I had a little time in my schedule this week to get out for a little midweek excursion. Now the snow only just finished melting away from my house in Eugene, and I was sure that gaining any amount of elevation heading up towards the mountains out of town, I was going to start running into, that slushy, slick, melting snow. Now, when they were forecasting the snow and ice storms, this is quite easy here. They did say that they didn't think it was going to get hit nearly as hard very far south of Eugene. So I decided to head south and sort of up into the Coast Range where at least I figured I'd had the most chances of it having been warmer, possibly less damage. Now I was still thinking that I wasn't going to make it up in here. I really thought I was probably going to get a mile, half mile, quarter mile, or even just 100 yards into this area before I would run into an impossible number of downed trees and branches. But sure enough, as I moved south and west, I started seeing less and less storm damage, fewer and fewer trees down, fewer and fewer branches broken, till eventually it just didn't even look like there had even been an ice storm.
The alternate route I found up into the hills continued to look promising. Gaining elevation quickly, I did encounter one fallen tree, but the occasional downed tree is not that unusual in western Oregon forests as the soil becomes saturated through the wet season. I'm simply not seeing the widespread storm damage we had closer to home.
So if you've watched my channel for any amount of time, you've probably heard me complain a number of times about all the difficulties that I've encountered trying to explore the Oregon Coast Range. It's just very, very checkerboarded with public land and private land, and I have just had so many experiences where I've run into gates or also just, run into overgrown roads that were just basically no longer there, that I pretty much gave up. And somehow I overlooked this huge parcel of public land that's actually state land. Well, I have to admit, I am thoroughly astonished by the fact that I even got up in here without being blocked by fallen trees, by the excellent condition of these roads, and how each time I get to a spot on the map where it says, you know, there's going to be a road going this way, there's going to be a road going that way, it's actually there. I explored up some dead-end spurs that were nonetheless accessible. When I saw this crazy network of roads on the map, I was like, there's no way all of that is still in place. And I thought there's no way I'm going to be able to connect from where I came up into the forest down to this little stretch that I thought I would have to get out from, coming from a completely other direction. So here's this stretch of road that I had previously just marked because it looked like it followed a stream or a creek or a river or something, and I thought maybe there might be some interesting campsites in there. I thought I was going to come in from over here, but after going down and taking a peek at that lake, I decided to see if I could wind my way up in here. And there's all these little roads that I thought there's no way this is going to get through, but I have actually connected up, which makes me feel like I can probably explore a lot more of this than I really thought was going to be possible. I'm just astonished. I'm astonished, thoroughly astonished. I recorded this route as I was driving, and those are actually a couple of campsites that I found. One of them was really cool with a nice view. Could go back to it, but I'm gonna see what else we find.
This road following the creek has been a pleasure. In summer, with all of the deciduous trees and undergrowth leafed out, I imagine the views would be much more filtered or even fully obscured. And I suspect that in the dry season, many of the countless waterfalls I've seen today would simply not even be flowing. One of the reasons I planned my route along here was in hopes of finding a creekside campsite, but so far the road has so closely followed the creek that there simply isn't room for any campsites to be tucked in between.
Oh, bingo. Finally, it looks like this might go down to a little campsite down by the creek. Okay, so actually quite a big campsite, but can't actually see the creek. Can hear it, but cannot see it.
Soon after, I've stumbled on another campsite, this one with a little nicer view of the creek, but I've still got a couple hours of daylight left, and I want to just explore this area more.
get pretty dark. It is 5 o'clock. I've found a number of serviceable campsites that all sort of go down along the creek. Many of them are sort of, there's so much growth and stuff that you can't really even see the creek from the campsites. And some of them are just really muddy, so like walking around, you just be traipsing through mud. So I've still got another little stretch of road here that follows the creek, and I'm going to see if I can find any other little spots that drop down and maybe something a little better than the other spots that I found. Yeah, I think that will do nicely. To be perfectly honest, I always have a little anxiety building fires in Western Oregon. In winter, everything is just soaked, the ground is soaked. I always breathe a sigh of relief once I actually get the fire going. I really am pleasantly surprised, or what an entirely pleasant day of wandering through just some beautiful sort of coastal rainforest, just wet, dense, damp, almost like a jungle. And sometimes, you know, the wetness gets annoying, but it's just so beautiful. And, you know, obviously this isn't some like deep, remote, backcountry wilderness. We're not too far from civilization. I saw one car with a couple people who were clearly out picking mushrooms. Other than that, I have not seen a soul on any of the roads. Nobody camped anywhere. And this is just a little chunk of Oregon I've never set foot in before. I've never explored. As I mentioned earlier, it is definitely a pleasure to just be able to wander through the Coast Range without running into gates, without running into overgrown roads, even if it was, you know, almost too tame for maybe some people's taste. I didn't even air down. It didn't even cross my mind because those gravel roads were so nicely maintained and so smooth. I am really happy with how this day went. And hopefully the rain will hold off, you know, for the rest of the evening. Have some dinner, sit around the campfire, and get a good night's sleep. Well, it's 6:30, but it is still dark outside. Oh, could use a little bit dimmer light here. Since I didn't really need any refrigeration on this little overnight trip, I decided to devote my Jackery 1000 to being able to run this little electric heater. I figured it wouldn't be very cold, and it's not, but it's just, it's got that sort of damp chilliness of being in the forest in the winter. And this little heater on its lower setting only pulls about 800 watts, so that will run it, and this makes a really nice intense heat. And since I'm here in the forest where it's wet and damp, I thought a little dry heat might be nicer than the Mr. Heater Buddy putting out more moisture. Now, running this electric heater system works fine for a little overnighter like this when I don't need the Jackery to run the fridge, but this would not work on a more extended trip, or really also even in the true cold if it was below freezing outside. I don't know that this little heater would make enough of a dent in really truly cold, and I would never be able to keep up with recharging my power station with the amount of power that consumes using it a little bit in the evening, a little bit in the morning. I started at 100% and I'm already down to 48% on this 1,000 watt unit. But for a damp one-nighter in the forest in winter, this is really nice to have this dry heat. My back window curtain here is just a piece of duck canvas or whatever it's called that I've just put some self-adhesive Velcro on it and some self-adhesive Velcro on there, and it works fine. The edges are a little frayed. This would be nicer if I had hemmed these edges, but I don't have a sewing machine. I don't know how to sew, and it works good enough for me. I'd like to get out and see what the campsite looks like, but it is still dark. I probably got into bed about 9 o'clock last night just because it gets dark so early, and I sat out there by the campfire for a while, but finally just went to bed. About 11 o'clock, 11:30 maybe, it started raining, and it rained all night long. It seems to have largely lightened up now, but I sleep well at night listening to the rain, and I had definitely a good night's sleep. All right, it is now 10 after 7. It is still just so far away from anything happening here. Keeps raining. The ground is just an absolutely mucky mess. I wanted to take a look at what this campsite looked like, but I've packed up the camper. I think I'm going to go ahead and roll out. Well, I would say it's time to air up and head home, but I never did air down.
So it's just time